6:47 a.m. I'm sipping coffee when our HOA Karen charges across my driveway with giant bolt cutters. Sparks are flying everywhere as she hacks through my gate lock. Screeching metal, her brother's tow truck rumbling right behind my Wrangler. "Your ugly modified Jeep violates our precious rules," she screams, waving fake papers. "It's getting impounded now, and here's your $500 storage fee, peasant." I just stand there barefoot on the cold concrete, watching her steal my truck from my own driveway with that smug plastic smile. Karen thinks she's punishing some random contractor who can't fight back. What she doesn't know is that my contractor vehicle serves a very different purpose, and the people I work with don't take kindly to theft. "You can bid on it at Saturday's auction if you want it back," she coos, already counting her profits. "Saturday's going to be very educational. For everyone." What's the most unhinged thing your HOA Karen has ever pulled? Drop it right now. Let me tell you who I really am, because it's going to make Karen's meltdown absolutely delicious. Marcus Rivera, Federal Drug Interdiction Task Force agent. 8 years of taking down cartel scumbags in places where cell phones don't work and backup is 3 hours away. The kind of job where your cover story better be perfect, because one slip gets you buried in a desert. 6 months ago, my supervisor assigned me to Willowbrook Estates. Not for drugs, for cover. When you're tracking rural cocaine networks, you need to look like a successful contractor who can drop $500,000 on suburban paradise. Federal pay is good, but my neighbors needed to believe I earned it building decks and remodeling kitchens. Willowbrook Estates, 280 cookie-cutter homes where automatic sprinklers hiss like mechanical snakes every morning at 6, and every mailbox bears the same brushed steel finish that feels cold even in summer heat. The asphalt still carried that fresh tar smell from last year's repaving, mixing with the sterile scent of uniform landscaping to create suburbia's signature perfume. Walking these sidewalks felt like navigating a life-sized architectural catalog. Here's the thing about my Jeep. It's not modified, it's federally equipped. Hidden compartments packed with encrypted radios, evidence storage, GPS tracking, night vision cameras, 75 grand worth of surveillance gear that looks like weekend warrior accessories to civilian eyes. That contractor truck had helped bust 3 cartel operations worth $40 million in cocaine. I've chased armed drug dealers through mountain forests, but nothing prepared me for the terror of HOA board meetings where grown adults debate mailbox height regulations for 3 hours. But federal equipment means federal property, and stealing federal property? That's a one-way ticket to federal prison. Now meet Karen Whitfield, the woman dumb enough to steal from Uncle Sam. 48, 4-term HOA dictator real estate agent who treats every conversation like a closing negotiation. Picture fake blonde hair shellacked into place, business casual uniform even at grocery stores. White BMW washed twice weekly with detailing that costs more than most people's car payments. The woman's vanilla perfume hits you like a chemical weapon 3 houses away. Industrial strength scent that announces her arrival before her stilettos click on concrete. Divorced 2 years ago, empty nest syndrome, HOA presidency, filling the void where her personality used to live. Karen treats our CCNRs like sacred scripture. Every violation notice a holy crusade against suburban chaos. But Karen's not just power drunk, she's profit smart. 4 years of perfected predatory tactics. Target undesirable residents with relentless violations, escalate fines until they can't afford legal fights, force panic sales below market value, then list those same properties through her real estate company at full price. Brother Dale's salvage yard handles the abandoned property disposal, keeping anything valuable while charging storage fees. It's a beautiful scam disguised as community service. Always research your HOA board's business connections before buying. When the people making rules profit from breaking you, you're already living in a legalized extortion racket. 15 families displaced over 4 years, averaging $26,000 profit per forced sale. Not bad money for a suburban warlord armed with clipboards and anger management issues. My first Karen encounter happened 2 weeks before the theft. I'd just finished 3 weeks in Colorado, tracking cocaine distribution through mountain towns where bears are friendlier than the locals. Bone-tired, craving peace and quiet. Found a violation notice instead. Unauthorized vehicle modifications. My brush guard, winch, and roof rack suddenly violating aesthetic standards. $300 fine plus 72 hours to comply or face escalating penalties. Figured diplomacy was worth attempting. Visited Karen's strip mall office. a converted nail salon that reeked of industrial air freshener, battling decades of chemical damage. The woman listened to my work explanation with the enthusiasm of someone forced to eat Brussels sprouts for dessert. "I don't care what your job requires," she said, manicured nails clicking against cheap laminate desk like tiny gavels. "Rules are rules." Federal instincts activated. This isn't about rules. This is about control and profit. So I started building a case against the suburban predator who had no idea she was targeting a federal agent. The next week, I had to travel for work. Actually, I was conducting federal surveillance from a hotel 15 minutes away, tracking a suspected cartel money drop through 3 counties. But to my neighbors, Caleb the contractor was out of town building someone's dream kitchen. Big mistake leaving Karen unsupervised. I returned 5 days later to find my mailbox stuffed like a Thanksgiving turkey. The first violation notice made me laugh. Apparently, my grass was too tall. Karen had measured it with a ruler, photographed the evidence like CSI Suburbia, and slapped me with a $150 fine for exceeding the 3.5-inch maximum by exactly half an inch. The precision was almost admirable. The second notice wiped the smile off my face. My mailbox was positioned wrong, violating some obscure setback requirement buried in page 47 of our CC&Rs. Another $200 vanished from my bank account courtesy of Karen's archaeological dig through housing regulations. By the third notice, my Jeep had magically transformed into a commercial vehicle displaying during restricted hours, even though it had been parked in the exact same driveway spot for 6 months without complaint. $300 for the crime of existing on my own property. The fourth notice was pure Karen genius. My garden hose, coiled neatly beside my garage where any reasonable person stores garden equipment, had become an unauthorized lawn ornament. $100 for owning basic yard maintenance tools. I wondered if she'd cite my trash cans next as unsightly receptacle violations. The fifth notice felt like a slap across the face. Karen declared me in chronic non-compliance based entirely on her own manufactured violations from the previous 4 days, adding another $400 to my growing tab. The woman had created her own kangaroo court and appointed herself Chief Justice. Total damage, $1,150 in 5 days. The sharp paper edges cut my fingers as I sorted through Karen's bureaucratic masterpiece, and the smell of fresh ink mixed with government form mustiness told me she'd been working overtime on her harassment campaign. But here's where 8 years of federal training kicked in. When someone attacks you systematically, you don't fight back immediately. You gather intelligence first. I remembered my supervisor's favorite saying from Quantico: document everything, assume nothing, trust but verify every detail. I grabbed my camera and took a comprehensive tour of Willowbrook Estates. The afternoon sun beat down on perfectly manicured sidewalks while automatic sprinkler systems whispered across identical lawns like suburban rain machines. 2 hours later, I had photographic evidence that would make any federal prosecutor smile with anticipation. 47 properties sporting identical violations that Karen had mysteriously overlooked with the selectivity of a corrupt referee. Mrs. Patterson's basketball hoop exceeded height restrictions by the exact same measurement mine supposedly did. The Johnson family's garden gnomes violated the same unauthorized lawn ornament rule as my functional garden hose. Steve Miller's commercial plumbing van was twice the size of my Jeep, but somehow didn't qualify as a commercial vehicle violation. And here's the kicker that made my federal agent blood boil. Karen's nephew, Tyler, had the exact same brush guard on his F-150 that she'd originally cited me for. Same manufacturer, same model, installed 6 months ago. 0 violations in his file, 0 harassment, 0 problems. From my federal case experience, I knew that selective enforcement was like kryptonite to HOA legal authority. Constitutional law requires equal application of rules without discrimination, and Karen was failing more spectacularly than a mob boss leaving fingerprints on evidence. I created a spreadsheet that would make my federal supervisors proud. Addresses, violation types, enforcement dates, photographic evidence, cross-references with demographic data. The pattern that emerged made my blood run cold with recognition. Karen wasn't targeting people randomly. She was systematically harassing minorities, elderly residents, and single women, anyone who fit her profile of undesirable neighborhood elements. 87% of her enforcement actions targeted protected classes, while her golf buddies parked RVs in driveways without facing a single citation. I'd tracked cartel financial networks through 6 countries and witnessed organized crime at its most sophisticated. But Karen's suburban extortion scheme was so well organized it deserved its own federal case study. The woman had weaponized Homeowner Association rules with military precision and corporate efficiency. 3 days after completing my documentation project, Karen called an emergency board meeting with the ominous agenda: addressing chronic violator and enhanced enforcement protocols. The meeting convened in our community clubhouse, a beige monument to suburban democracy that smelled like stale coffee and decades of broken dreams. Folding metal chairs scraped against linoleum floors as Karen arranged them courtroom style, positioning herself as judge, jury, and executioner. Board composition revealed the power structure. 3 Karen cronies from her book club who nodded at everything she said like dashboard bobbleheads, plus 2 intimidated neighbors who'd learned that opposing Karen meant becoming her next target. "We have a resident who consistently violates our community standards," Karen announced, somehow making community standards sound like matters of national security. "This behavior threatens property values and neighborhood harmony." She never used my name, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. Karen presented a slideshow of my violations, with the dramatic flair of a federal prosecutor arguing treason charges. That night, while researching property records, I discovered Karen's real estate company represented a cash buyer offering $75,000 over market for my lot. The woman had turned neighborhood terrorism into profitable business. Karen wasted no time implementing her enhanced enforcement protocols. The woman declared me in chronic violation status, which apparently gave her superpowers to fine me $200 per day, retroactive to my first violation. The math made my head spin. Karen was attempting to bill me for roughly the cost of a small car, all for grass that was allegedly too tall and a garden hose that offended her aesthetic sensibilities. Her heels clicked against my driveway concrete like a countdown timer as she hand-delivered the escalation notice. The rough texture of the official paper felt expensive between my fingers, probably costing the HOA more to print than my actual violations were worth. "This is your final opportunity for compliance," she announced, standing there in her business casual armor like a suburban general accepting surrender terms. But Karen wasn't content with financial warfare. 3 days later, she made a tactical decision that would backfire more spectacularly than a 4th of July firework in a garage. She called the police. I was replacing my Jeep's air filter when 2 sheriff's deputies knocked on my door. Deputy Rodriguez and Officer Kim looked like they'd rather be investigating actual crimes, probably expecting to find a meth lab or weapons cache based on Karen's breathless 911 call about suspicious modifications and possible terrorist activity. "Ma'am reported suspicious vehicle modifications," Rodriguez explained, glancing at my completely normal Jeep with the expression of someone forced to investigate reports of unicorn sightings. "Claims possible drug dealer or terrorist sympathizer." Here's where Karen's plan hit a federal brick wall at 90 miles per hour. I discreetly showed them my federal credentials while Karen watched from her driveway, probably expecting to see me in handcuffs within minutes. The sweet taste of anticipation must have been building in her mouth as she prepared to watch her problem neighbor get arrested. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up when he recognized the federal surveillance equipment. Turns out his brother worked my task force. Federal law enforcement is a surprisingly small world. Officer Kim took one look at the encrypted radio gear and started grinning like someone had just told him the best joke of his career. The metallic static from their patrol car radio mixed with the smell of fresh coffee from their thermal mugs as they conducted the world's most thorough investigation of perfectly legal vehicle modifications. For Karen's benefit, they examined every piece of equipment with the kind of serious expressions that made her shift nervously from one designer heel to the other. "No violations found," Rodriguez announced loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "Federal law enforcement equipment, all properly authorized and completely legal." Karen's face went through several interesting color changes, from confident pink to confused white to horrified gray, as her master plan crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. But I wasn't done with my compliance trap yet. That night I temporarily removed every modification from my Jeep. Brush guard, winch, roof rack, everything that had triggered Karen's original violation notice disappeared into my garage. By morning, my federal surveillance platform looked like a soccer mom's weekend grocery getter, so bland it could have been featured in a beige paint commercial. I marched over to Karen's strip mall office and requested written confirmation that my vehicle now complied with all HOA standards. The woman was forced to examine my completely stock Jeep and admit, in writing, that it met every single aesthetic requirement in our CC&Rs. "Your vehicle appears to be in full compliance with all current standards," she wrote, probably choking on every word like they were made of broken glass. 24 hours later, I reinstalled everything. Same equipment, same configuration, identical to modifications Karen had previously approved for other residents. But now I had her written approval in my federal evidence file, creating a legal contradiction she didn't even realize she'd signed her name to. From my federal training, I knew this created what lawyers call a grandfather clause situation. You can't retroactively ban what you've previously approved without changing the actual CC&Rs through proper legal procedures. Karen was making up rules faster than a kindergartner playing make-believe courthouse. Karen's response was swift and predictably desperate. She attempted to fine me for deceptive compliance, claiming I'd tricked the board into approval. The woman scheduled another emergency meeting to declare my modifications inherently unsafe, regardless of prior written authorization. Meanwhile, the community was waking up to Karen's tactics like neighbors discovering they'd been living next to a serial killer. Mrs. Bianca, my retired teacher neighbor, approached me with trembling hands and her own horror stories. Karen had been threatening her with garden maintenance violations and unauthorized cultural decorations, code for the beautiful Chinese lanterns, Mrs. Bianca hung during holidays. 3 other families emerged from the shadows with similar tales, each one adding another piece to the pattern I was documenting. Karen's enforcement decisions were becoming impossible to ignore, especially after the police visit that publicly cleared me while exposing her frivolous complaints. But here's what Karen didn't know. While she was busy measuring grass with rulers and manufacturing violations, I was building a federal case that would make prosecutors weep with joy. The woman thought she was fighting some random contractor who'd eventually cave under financial pressure. What she was actually doing was providing evidence for her own federal prosecution, one violation notice at a time. Then came the morning that changed everything. I woke up at 6:47 a.m. to the sound of industrial bolt cutters slicing through steel. Not the gentle hum of suburban sprinklers or the distant rumble of morning commuters, the harsh screech of metal being severed with mechanical precision that could wake the dead. Karen had finally crossed the line from harassment into outright federal crime. I stumbled to my kitchen window, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips, and watched our HOA president orchestrate what could only be described as a military operation against my driveway. She stood there directing her brother Dale as he backed his tow truck toward my Jeep, while sparks flew from the angle grinder cutting through my gate lock like it was made of tissue paper. The acrid smell of hot metal filled the morning air, mixing with diesel exhaust from Dale's truck to create an industrial perfume that screamed crime in progress. Karen's vanilla perfume somehow cut through it all, announcing her presence like a serial killer's signature at a crime scene. "Morning, Caleb," she called out cheerfully when she spotted me at the window, waving a violation notice like a victory flag. "Your vehicle's been impounded for chronic aesthetic violations and suspected abandonment." Suspected abandonment of a vehicle parked in my own driveway, while I was clearly home, drinking coffee and watching her commit grand theft auto in broad daylight with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. The rough concrete felt cold and gritty under my bare feet as I walked outside, still in pajamas, to witness the completion of Karen's masterpiece. My federal surveillance vehicle, loaded with classified equipment worth more than most people's annual salaries, was being winched onto a flatbed truck by a guy who probably couldn't spell surveillance if his parole officer demanded it. "You can't just steal someone's truck," I said, keeping my voice calm while internally calculating federal felony charges that would make a prosecutor's career. "It's not theft, it's lawful impoundment," Karen replied, consulting her clipboard like it contained the actual Constitution. Section 12.4 of our emergency protocols clearly states that abandoned vehicles pose security risks requiring immediate removal. I'd memorized every word of our CC&Rs during my research. There was no Section 12.4. Karen was literally making up federal-sounding laws while standing in my driveway stealing actual federal property. The irony was so thick you could serve it for breakfast. But here's what made this moment beautiful. I let her do it. Every federal instinct screamed to flash my badge, stop the theft, and arrest everyone involved before they could damage classified equipment. But my strategic mind saw a bigger picture developing like a photograph in a darkroom. Karen was about to commit multiple federal felonies while I had perfect documentation and witnesses. Sometimes the best way to catch a criminal is to let them finish committing the crime in front of cameras. Dale finished securing my Jeep with chains that rattled like Jacob Marley's ghost, completely oblivious that he was handling evidence from active federal drug operations. The metallic clicking mixed with Karen's triumphant laughter as she handed me a bill for $500 in emergency impound fees, with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won the lottery. Your vehicle will be auctioned Saturday at 2 p.m. to recover unpaid violations and storage costs, she announced, already mentally redecorating her house with anticipated profits. Don't worry, you're welcome to bid on your own property. The woman had just told me I could buy back my own stolen truck. The audacity was almost admirable, like watching someone rob a bank while wearing a name tag. But Karen's timing couldn't have been worse for federal security. My Jeep contained encrypted communication equipment, evidence from ongoing investigations, and surveillance gear that was technically classified above her security clearance level. What started as a civil HOA dispute had just escalated into a potential national security breach requiring immediate federal notification. I watched my vehicle disappear around the corner while neighbors peered through curtains, too terrified to intervene but clearly horrified by the suburban crime drama unfolding. Mrs. Bianca stood in her doorway with her phone out, documenting everything with the dedication of a war correspondent covering a coup. The moment Dale's truck vanished, I called my supervisor. Agent Sarah Bianca listened to my report with the kind of deadly silence that usually precedes explosions or federal task force mobilizations. Let me understand this correctly, she said after a pause that lasted roughly 3 ice ages. A HOA president just stole a federal surveillance vehicle containing classified equipment, and she's planning to auction it publicly to suburban bidders? That's correct. And here's the mini twist that'll make your day. Dale's Auto Salvage just popped up in our money laundering database. We've been watching it for 6 months. The silence that followed could have powered a small city. Marcus, this has escalated beyond your cover assignment, Bianca finally said. We're opening a full federal investigation, but I want you to let this play out until the auction. Let her commit every possible federal crime in front of maximum witnesses. Perfect. Because while Karen was planning her Saturday auction, counting anticipated profits and preparing to sell federal property to the highest bidder, I was coordinating with federal prosecutors who were practically drooling over what might be the easiest RICO case they'd see all decade. Karen thought she'd just solved her Caleb problem. Saturday's auction was going to solve mine. That night, while Karen was probably celebrating with wine and spreadsheets full of auction profit calculations, I was doing what federal agents do best, digging into places where normal people fear to tread. I started with basic property records, expecting to find simple harassment patterns. What I discovered made me lean back in my kitchen chair and let out the kind of low whistle that usually precedes someone muttering, "Holy shit," in federal briefing rooms. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the blue glow of my laptop screen as I scrolled through 4 years of real estate transactions. Karen Whitfield wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a systematic displacement operation that would make organized crime families jealous of her efficiency. 15 forced sales in Willowbrook Estates, every single one following the identical playbook. Relentless violation notices leading to financial pressure until families couldn't afford legal fights. Then quick sales at suspiciously low prices. Karen's prestige properties handled every listing, collecting fat commissions, while her brother Dale's salvage yard conveniently disposed of any abandoned personal property that might have resale value. The math told a story that federal prosecutors dream about. Average neighborhood home value, $520,000. Average forced sale price, $385,000. That's $135,000 per house in manufactured equity disappearing into Karen's network like magic tricks with mortgage documents. 15 houses times $135,000 equals over $2 million in coordinated wealth transfer disguised as community standards enforcement. From my federal database access, the kind Karen definitely didn't know I possessed, I pulled financial records that painted an even uglier picture. Money flowed through Karen's real estate company like water through a sieve, with mysterious kickbacks to Dale's operation and cash deposits that smelled like laundered drug money from 3 states away. But here's where my jaw actually dropped. Agent Bianca had mentioned Dale's Auto Salvage was already under federal surveillance for suspected cartel money laundering. What we'd assumed were separate investigations were actually the same criminal enterprise viewed from different angles. Karen's HOA scheme wasn't about suburban power trips. It was potentially a front for washing drug money through forced real estate transactions. I cross-referenced forced sale dates with known cartel financial activity in our region. The correlation was strong enough to make any federal prosecutor start hyperventilating with excitement. Every major drug bust in our area was followed within 60 days by a forced sale in Willowbrook Estates, with mysterious cash buyers appearing immediately to purchase below-market properties. The civil rights angle made it federal dynamite. Analysis of Karen's targets showed 87% were minorities, elderly residents, or single women. From my training, I knew that's not random enforcement. That's systematic discrimination designed to clear undesirable residents and replace them with cartel-connected buyers who'd pay inflated prices for clean property titles. The taste of stale coffee turned bitter as I realized the scope of what Karen had built. Federal databases showed 3 previous FBI investigations into similar schemes across the Southwest. All involved corrupt HOAs, forced sales, and cartel money flowing through real estate like legitimate business transactions. I've spent 8 years tracking drug networks through mountains and desert towns, but Karen's suburban operation was more sophisticated than most cartel financial schemes I'd busted. The woman had weaponized homeowner associations with the precision of someone who understood federal prosecution patterns and designed her crimes to stay just under radar thresholds. I called Agent Bianca back with my findings. Her response was immediate. "Marcus, you've just uncovered a potential RICO enterprise. This isn't local corruption. This is organized crime with federal implications." Within hours, federal prosecutors were reviewing my documentation with the enthusiasm of kids opening Christmas presents. The beauty of Karen's auction plan became crystal clear. She was about to commit multiple federal felonies in front of witnesses while attempting to sell government property containing evidence of her own criminal enterprise. But we needed her to complete the crime for maximum legal impact. Karen was walking into a federal trap of her own design, and Saturday's auction would be the perfect stage for her downfall. The next morning, my kitchen became a federal command center that would make Mission Impossible jealous. Agent Bianca arrived at 7 a.m. with a briefcase full of surveillance equipment and the kind of grim smile that usually precedes career-making arrests. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the electronic buzz of federal communication gear as we transformed my suburban breakfast nook into mission control for what headquarters officially designated Operation Suburban Justice, because federal agents apparently have the same naming sense as action movie writers. "Marcus, this has escalated beyond anything we anticipated," Bianca said, spreading aerial photos of Willowbrook Estates across my kitchen table with the precision of a general planning the invasion of Normandy. "We're coordinating with Financial Crimes, Civil Rights Division, and RICO prosecutors. Karen's little auction is about to become a federal circus, and she's the main act." The plan was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Let Karen commit every possible federal crime in front of maximum witnesses, then arrest her at the moment of peak humiliation while cameras rolled. Federal agencies love public takedowns of corruption cases. It sends messages that echo through communities for generations. Chen assigned 4 federal agents to attend as interested bidders, each with cover stories that would make Hollywood casting directors proud. Agent Martinez would pose as a contractor hunting equipment deals, Agent Thompson as a suburban dad seeking a family vehicle, Agent Williams as a classic car enthusiast with cash to burn, and Agent Rodriguez as a general curiosity seeker. All would be wired for audio and equipped with hidden cameras that could capture a confession from 50 yards away. "Your job," Bianca explained, setting down surveillance photos with the deliberate care of someone arranging evidence for a jury, "is to reveal your identity mid-auction for maximum dramatic impact. Let Karen dig herself into the deepest possible hole, then expose everything in front of the entire community." The texture of glossy surveillance photos felt smooth under my fingertips as I reviewed each agent's position. We'd learned from years of cartel takedowns that public exposure destroys criminal enterprises more effectively than quiet prosecutions. Criminals lose their power when communities see them in handcuffs. Local media coordination fell to Federal Public Affairs, who contacted Channel 7's investigative reporter Sarah Martinez to cover the neighborhood auction as human interest. She had no idea she was actually documenting a federal sting operation until arrests began. The irony was perfect. Karen's publicity stunt would become her own televised destruction. Mrs. Bianca, my retired teacher neighbor, had emerged as our most valuable community asset. The woman documented Karen's activities with the dedication of a professional surveillance specialist, proving that angry retirees make excellent undercover operatives when properly motivated by years of harassment. "I've been watching that woman terrorize our neighborhood for 4 years," Mrs. Bianca said, handing me a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. "Times someone with real authority made her pay for what she's done to families here." The technical surveillance setup required federal-level precision. Hidden cameras positioned around my property would capture Karen's pre-auction preparations, while audio equipment in the clubhouse would record every statement she made about her legal authority to auction federal property. Each recording would become courtroom evidence with chain-of-custody documentation that would survive any defense challenge. From my experience with cartel operations, I knew criminals often confess publicly when they feel powerful and protected. Karen's auction speech would likely include detailed claims about her authority, explanations of her legal procedures, and statements about my abandonment that would constitute admissions of guilt in federal court. Here's something most people don't know about federal law. Auctioning government property without authorization is an automatic felony, regardless of any civil disputes or HOA claims. Karen could invoke every homeowner association rule ever written. The moment she attempted to transfer ownership of federal surveillance equipment, she'd committed a crime carrying mandatory prison time. But we needed the displaced families to complete our civil rights case. Agent Bianca's team contacted 3 families forced out by Karen's harassment campaigns. All agreed to attend the auction and provide victim impact testimony for media coverage, demonstrating the systematic nature of Karen's discrimination while showing the community that fighting back was not only possible, but federally supported. The federal coordination impressed even my cynical agent brain. Financial Crimes Division traced money flows through real estate transactions with forensic accounting that could track pennies through Swiss banks. Civil Rights Division documented discrimination patterns using statistical analysis that would convince any jury. RICO prosecutors prepared enterprise charges that could seize all profits from Karen's 4-year operation, leaving her financially destroyed even after prison. "This is going to be a textbook case for federal training programs," Bianca said, reviewing charges on her laptop screen while the morning sun cast perfect shadows through my kitchen blinds. Theft of government property, civil rights violations, money laundering, conspiracy, abusive process. Karen's provided enough evidence for a prosecutor's wet dream. Saturday's timing was choreographed for maximum impact. 2 p.m. start meant optimal community attendance, perfect lighting for video evidence, and sufficient time for Karen to make multiple incriminating statements before the hammer fell. The woman who'd spent months harassing a simple contractor was about to discover she'd been targeting a federal agent trained specifically to dismantle criminal enterprises. Saturday would be very educational. By Thursday morning, Karen was losing her mind with the kind of desperate panic that makes criminals do spectacularly stupid things that federal agents dream about documenting. Word was spreading through Willowbrook Estates faster than gossip at a church potluck after the pastor gets caught stealing collection money. Neighbors were talking, comparing Karen horror stories, and suddenly her iron grip on community fear was cracking like cheap paint under a blowtorch. The woman who'd ruled through isolation and intimidation was discovering that her victims had found each other and started comparing notes. Karen's response was swift, predictable, and beautifully self-destructive. She launched a social media blitz that would have impressed political smear campaign managers, flooding Facebook, Nextdoor, and Instagram with warnings about the dangerous contractor with suspicious surveillance equipment living among unsuspecting families. Every post dripped with paranoia and accusations that made me wonder if she'd been sampling her own Xanax prescription. The irony was so thick you could package it and sell it as fertilizer. She was accusing an actual federal drug enforcement agent of being a drug dealer, posting her accusations on platforms that federal investigators monitor routinely for exactly these kinds of criminal confessions. "This man has been conducting illegal surveillance on our neighborhood," Karen posted, apparently unaware that I was literally conducting legal surveillance on criminals like her. "His vehicle contains equipment designed for drug activities. and he's shown threatening behavior toward community leaders maintaining safety standards. Threatening behavior. I'd spoken to the woman maybe 6 times, always politely, while she systematically violated my constitutional rights and stole federal property. I've arrested cartel bosses with better legal judgment than Karen was showing, which is saying something considering most drug dealers have the legal education of turnips. But Karen's desperation led to her most beautiful tactical error yet. She attempted to buy witness silence with all the subtlety of a mob boss in a bad movie. Mrs. Bianca called me Thursday afternoon with barely contained excitement. "Marcus, you absolutely must hear this recording." The audio quality was crystal clear. Apparently, Mrs. Bianca's iPhone had federal-grade recording capabilities. Karen's vanilla perfume was so overpowering you could practically smell it through the phone speakers as she made her corruption pitch. "I know you've been talking to our problem neighbor." Karen's voice oozed fake maternal concern. "But you need to understand he's genuinely dangerous. However, I'm prepared to overlook your recent garden violations and provide a $500 community service award if you help maintain neighborhood safety by forgetting what you think you witnessed." $500 to forget witnessing grand theft auto of federal property. The woman had just committed federal witness tampering while being recorded by her intended victim, creating evidence so perfect it belonged in law school textbooks. Here's something most people don't understand about federal law. Witness tampering carries heavier penalties than many underlying crimes because it strikes at the foundation of our justice system. Karen had just handed prosecutors a gift-wrapped felony with a bow on top, but Karen wasn't finished digging her legal grave with a backhoe. Friday morning brought evidence that she'd graduated to property destruction. My sprinkler lines had been surgically severed, creating muddy bomb craters across my lawn that looked like a battlefield after artillery practice. The smell of wet earth mixed with the metallic tang of severed copper pipes told the story of Karen's midnight vandalism project. Motion-activated cameras captured everything in high-definition glory. Karen creeping across my property at 2 a.m. with wire cutters, systematically destroying irrigation equipment with the focused intensity of someone who'd completely snapped. Her white BMW sat parked on the street like a getaway car driven by someone whose only previous crime was returning library books late. The rough, muddy texture of destroyed grass squelched under my feet as I documented federal evidence that would make prosecutors weep tears of joy. But community sabotage was just Karen's opening act for Friday's main event. The emergency HOA board meeting she called that evening became the kind of spectacular meltdown that gets studied in federal law enforcement academies. Karen demanded emergency expulsion procedures to address the immediate safety threat posed by a dangerous resident, while 50 neighbors packed the clubhouse tighter than federal prisoners in a transport van. "We have a resident who has made threats and engaged in suspicious activities," Karen announced, somehow making suspicious activities sound like international terrorism. "For community safety, I'm implementing emergency protocols that bypass normal due process requirements." Emergency protocols. The woman was literally declaring martial law over a homeowner association while federal surveillance equipment recorded every unconstitutional word. But here's where Karen's desperation created her most devastating mistake. Board member Jim Morrison, a quiet accountant who'd been intimidated into silence for 3 years, finally discovered his backbone and decided to use it. "Karen, I've been reviewing our financial records," he said, voice trembling but determined. "You've been billing the HOA $2,400 monthly for security services provided by Dale's company. Services that consist of driving through twice weekly and writing reports about grass measurements." The room went silent except for fluorescent lights humming and the sound of Karen's empire crashing. "But here's the interesting part," Jim continued, clearly enjoying his rebellion. "These security reports always target residents whose properties your real estate company lists within 60 days. The mini twist that would destroy Karen's remaining credibility had just been delivered by her own intimidated board member in front of 50 witnesses, while federal cameras captured everything. Saturday's auction was going to be beautiful. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes federal operations feel like destiny unfolding according to plan. Karen was up before dawn, transforming into the suburban equivalent of a carnival barker preparing for the biggest show of her criminal career. I watched from my kitchen window as she directed Dale's crew setting up auction displays in the HOA clubhouse parking lot like she was orchestrating the neighborhood event of the century. The woman had printed professional banners reading Community Asset Recovery Auction and Neighborhood Improvement Initiative. Apparently, crime sounded better when wrapped in corporate buzzwords that would make marketing executives proud. But Karen's promotional blitz revealed just how far she'd descended into delusional criminality. She'd invited the entire city council to witness what she called effective HOA governance in action, apparently believing that having government officials present would legitimize her federal property theft. The mayor's office had even sent a representative to observe innovative community solutions. They had no idea they were about to witness the most comprehensive federal takedown in suburban history. Karen posted livestream announcements on every social media platform, promising exciting bidding opportunities on high-quality contractor equipment. Her Facebook event page showed 47 people interested, 32 definitely attending, and comments ranging from supportive neighbors to federal agents posing as curious buyers who couldn't wait to see the unique vehicle modifications. The irony was so perfect, it felt like justice porn written by federal prosecutors with poetic licenses. Mrs. Bianca provided real-time intelligence updates with the dedication of a CIA operative monitoring enemy movements. Karen had arrived at 6 a.m. with 2 coffee urns, folding tables, and a portable microphone system that could broadcast her federal crimes to the entire neighborhood with professional audio quality. "She's setting up like this is some kind of charity fundraiser," Mrs. Bianca reported, her voice tinged with the anticipation of someone about to witness spectacular karma. Dale's brought 3 of his salvage yard employees as security, and Karen's wearing her most expensive business suit like she's closing million-dollar real estate deals. The federal surveillance team was positioned with military precision around the auction perimeter. Agent Martinez had arrived early, posing as a contractor eager to inspect professional equipment. Agent Thompson brought his teenage son as cover for being a family man seeking reliable transportation, and Agent Rodriguez was documenting everything with cameras hidden in a coffee thermos that probably cost more than Karen's monthly HOA salary. Channel 7's news crew had set up their equipment under the pretense of covering innovative neighborhood problem-solving, with reporter Sarah Martinez completely unaware that her human interest story was about to become the lead criminal justice piece of the decade. Karen's pre-auction speech to the gathering crowd revealed the full scope of her disconnect from reality. "Today we demonstrate that communities can take decisive action against problem residents who refuse to comply with basic standards," she announced through her portable PA system, her voice carrying across Willowbrook Estates like a dictator addressing conquered territory. "This vehicle represents everything wrong with people who think rules don't apply to them." The rough concrete of the clubhouse steps felt solid under my feet as I positioned myself in the growing crowd, watching Karen dig her legal grave deeper with every word she spoke into federal recording equipment. "The previous owner abandoned this property after demonstrating patterns of aggressive behavior and suspicious activities," Karen continued, apparently forgetting that I was standing 30 feet away listening to her publicly defame a federal agent. "Today's auction will fund community improvements while removing dangerous influences from our neighborhood." Dangerous influences. The woman was describing a federal drug enforcement agent like he was a terrorist sleeper cell operating from suburban driveways. But here's where Karen's overconfidence created her most spectacular mistake. She decided to provide detailed explanations of her legal authority that would become prosecution exhibits in federal court. "Under emergency protocols established by this HOA board," she declared, consulting notes like she was reading constitutional amendments, "abandoned vehicles posing security risks can be immediately impounded and auctioned to recover community costs and ensure neighborhood safety." Emergency protocols that existed only in Karen's imagination, applied to federal property by someone with less legal authority than a mall security guard. The crowd had swelled to nearly 80 people, the largest gathering in Willowbrook Estates history. Displaced families had returned to witness Karen's downfall. Current residents were documenting everything with smartphones, and federal agents were positioned like pieces on a chessboard waiting for checkmate. Dale wheeled my Jeep into position with chains rattling like Jacob Marley's ghost, completely oblivious that he was handling evidence from active federal drug operations, while news cameras captured every moment. Karen raised her auction gavel with the triumphant expression of someone who believed she'd finally won her war against undesirable neighbors. She had no idea she was about to discover what happens when suburban dictators steal from federal agents trained to dismantle criminal enterprises. The hammer was about to fall, but not the way Karen expected. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our community asset recovery auction. Karen's voice boomed through the portable PA system as she gavelled the proceedings to order, standing behind a folding table like a judge presiding over her own criminal court. 80-plus neighbors had gathered in the clubhouse parking lot, creating the largest crowd in Willowbrook Estates history for what would become the most spectacular public downfall in suburban law enforcement legend. The smell of fresh waxed linoleum from the nearby clubhouse mixed with autumn leaves and diesel exhaust from Dale's tow truck, creating an oddly festive atmosphere for what was about to become a federal crime scene. Today we're auctioning a vehicle abandoned by a former resident who violated community standards and demonstrated concerning behavior patterns, Karen announced, consulting her notes with the confidence of someone who believed she possessed actual legal authority. Bidding starts at $15,000 for this well-equipped contractor vehicle. Well-equipped. If she only knew how well-equipped. Federal Agent Martinez raised his hand first. $15,000? Agent Thompson followed immediately. $16,000. The bidding war began exactly as planned, with federal agents driving the price higher while Karen's eyes literally sparkled with greed. $20,000, $22,000, $25,000. Each bid made her smile wider as she calculated profits that would never reach her bank account. $28,000, called Agent Williams, playing his role as an enthusiastic classic car collector. Karen was practically glowing with triumph, probably already planning luxury vacations funded by federal equipment theft. The crowd watched in fascination as the price climbed toward $30,000 for a vehicle most of them had seen parked peacefully in my driveway for months. That's when I made my move. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward the microphone with the casual confidence of someone who'd spent 8 years infiltrating criminal organizations. "Before bidding continues, I'd like to inspect the vehicle I'm interested in purchasing." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but her greed overrode her caution. "Of course. Please examine the merchandise thoroughly." The crowd parted as I approached my own Jeep, displayed like evidence at a crime scene with Dale standing guard like the world's most incompetent security officer. News cameras followed my movement while federal agents maintained their positions around the perimeter. I opened the driver's door and reached into the center console, pulling out the hidden panel that revealed federal surveillance equipment gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Electronic equipment hummed to life as I activated encrypted radio systems that clearly weren't standard contractor modifications. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I withdrew evidence bags, federal communication devices, and night vision equipment that obviously belonged to law enforcement rather than weekend warriors. "Interesting modifications," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, then reached into my jacket and produced the leather folder that would change everything. The federal badge caught sunlight like a beacon as I held it high above my head. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Caleb Rivera, Federal Drug Interdiction Task Force." My voice carried across the silent parking lot with the authority of 8 years enforcing federal law. "Mrs. Whitfield is attempting to auction stolen federal law enforcement property." The silence that followed could have powered a small city. Karen's face went through every color in the visible spectrum, confident pink to confused white to horrified gray to nauseous green, as the reality of her situation hit like a freight train loaded with federal charges. That's impossible," she stammered, her microphone picking up every tremor in her voice. "He's just a contractor. I have documentation of violations and abandonment procedures." "Ma'am," I replied, walking closer to her folding table podium while federal agents moved into position around the parking lot. "You've just attempted to auction federal surveillance equipment belonging to an active drug enforcement operation, in front of news cameras, with 80 witnesses." Dale attempted to flee toward his tow truck but found Agent Rodriguez blocking his path with the kind of smile that usually precedes handcuffs and Miranda rights. The crowd erupted in whispers and phone cameras as Karen's suburban empire crumbled in real time. "Karen Whitfield," Agent Bianca's voice cut through the chaos as she approached with federal arrest team backup. "You're under arrest for theft of federal property, civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit fraud, and witness tampering." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the parking lot as Karen was arrested at her own auction, still wearing her most expensive business suit, while Channel 7 cameras captured every moment for the evening news. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Bianca continued, but Karen was already talking, trying to explain her legal authority and proper procedures in a stream of self-incriminating statements that prosecutors would love. Dale received his own matching handcuffs as federal agents discovered outstanding warrants and evidence of money laundering operations at his salvage yard. Mrs. Bianca stepped forward with her manila folder full of documentation, providing witness testimony for news cameras while displaced families shared their stories of systematic harassment and forced displacement. The federal government takes civil rights violations seriously, I addressed the crowd while federal vehicles surrounded the auction site. Mrs. Whitfield has been operating a criminal enterprise disguised as HOA governance. Every family she harassed will receive justice. Karen's auction gavel lay abandoned on her folding table, next to violation notices that would become federal evidence in the prosecution that would end her criminal career permanently. The hammer had fallen, but justice was just getting started. 6 months later, Karen Whitfield was beginning year 2 of her federal prison sentence, and Willowbrook Estates had transformed into the kind of community people actually wanted to live in. The federal courthouse had been packed during sentencing, with displaced families providing victim impact statements that made even seasoned prosecutors emotional. Karen received 4 years federal prison plus $340,000 in restitution for theft, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and RICO charges. Dale got 2 years for money laundering and tax evasion, with his salvage yard seized under federal asset forfeiture laws. The civil rights settlements changed everything. 15 families received an average of $95,000 each from federal court judgments, plus legal fees covered by HOA insurance that immediately dropped the association after reviewing Karen's criminal enterprise documentation. The insurance payouts forced comprehensive policy changes requiring transparency, elected oversight, and federal civil rights compliance training for all future board members. Mrs. Bianca had been unanimously elected as our new HOA president, implementing policies that turned our Homeowner Association into a model of democratic governance. Violation procedures now required due process, enforcement had to be uniform and documented, and board meetings were live-streamed for transparency that made corruption impossible. We learned that sunshine is the best disinfectant for suburban tyranny, Mrs. Bianca said during our first post-Karen annual meeting, where attendance reached 200 residents celebrating their liberation from fear-based governance. The smell of coffee and donuts filled the clubhouse during meetings that focused on community building rather than community harassment. Children played in streets where Karen had once measured grass with rulers, and neighbors actually talked to each other without fear of violation, notices appearing the next morning. My personal healing surprised me. Processing the trauma of losing my partner in that Colorado operation had been impossible while living under constant harassment, but helping my neighbors fight back gave me purpose beyond federal work. Agent Bianca approved my transfer to the new Suburban Corruption Task Force, where Karen's case became the training model for investigating HOA-based criminal enterprises across 3 states. You've created a federal specialty, Bianca told me during my performance review. Turns out suburban crime is more common than anyone realized, and you're uniquely qualified to spot the patterns. The federal impact rippled far beyond our neighborhood. Karen's case prompted congressional hearings on HOA abuse, leading to the Federal Homeowner Protection Act that established civil rights oversight for community associations and created federal penalties for systematic harassment. Legal scholars now study the Willowbrook case as precedent for applying federal civil rights law to homeowner association governance. But the most meaningful change was the community benefit initiative funded by Karen's restitution payments. The Willowbrook Homeowner Rights Education Center opened in the former location of Karen's strip mall real estate office, offering free legal clinics for HOA disputes across 5 counties. Volunteer attorneys provide consultation services that have prevented dozens of harassment campaigns before they could destroy families' lives. Annual scholarships of $10,000 each go to children of families forced out by HOA abuse, ensuring that Karen's victims receive long-term benefits from her criminal prosecution. 3 kids are currently studying law specifically to become civil rights attorneys, specializing in homeowner protection. Our neighborhood's transformation became a national model. Property values increased 18% due to positive media coverage and federal civil rights protections that attracted families seeking communities with actual justice systems. Home and Garden Television featured Willowbrook Estates in their Community Comeback series, showcasing how federal intervention restored neighborhood harmony. The annual Community Harmony Festival replaced Karen's reign of terror with celebration of diversity that would have given her nightmares. Families display the vehicles, decorations, and cultural expressions that Karen had tried to ban, creating the kind of authentic community that suburban planners dream about but rarely achieve. Standing in my driveway on a recent Saturday morning, watching kids play street hockey where violation notices once appeared daily, I realized something important about undercover work. Sometimes the best way to protect people is to stop hiding and stand up publicly for what's right. My Jeep sits in the same spot where Karen stole it, now surrounded by neighbors' boats, RVs, work trucks, and motorcycles. A rainbow of automotive diversity that represents true community standards based on mutual respect rather than arbitrary control.